In today's episode, we're going to be discussing financial abuse, what it is and what to do about it. And today's self-help tip will be why you should lead with your head and not your heart. Thank you for joining us on Breaking Free with Kerry and Tara, the podcast where we talk about strategies, tips, and tricks for navigating and recovering from toxic relationships.
I'm your host, Dr. Kerry McAvoy, a mental health specialist with over 20 years of counseling experience and the author of Love You More, an inside graphic look at my survival of a narcissistic relationship.
And I'm your other host, Tara Blair-Ball, certified relationship coach, abuse survivor, and author of Reclaim and Recover, Heal from Toxic Relationships with the 7-Step Guided Journal.
We're thrilled that you're here with us today. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes and leave us a review and let us know what you think of the show. I was contacted this week by a woman who is in a relationship and she's desperate to get out, but she has no money. I don't know how many times I hear this a week, Tara. I'm sure you do too.
I do.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about financial abuse because one of the things I came across recently, I saw this article on abuse. And it was saying that when they were looking just at abuse in general, it didn't even specify what kind of abuse, that financial abuse, a financial problem, deprivation, or being withheld or something occurred 99% of the time. 99. I mean, I thought he would say, 80 plus, but or 90%, but it was nearly 100% of the time.
Yeah. It's not surprising too, just because it's a way to keep victims isolated, dependent. It's a way to continue to have control in that relationship in a way that's really personal. Money is so much about our own security and stability.
I remember when I was married the first time and we started to move financially together when we had our first paychecks, because we both got out of college and got our first jobs and the first paychecks arrived and we needed to do something with it. Do we have our own bank accounts? Do we have joint bank accounts? Do you remember that kind of like discussion? And in fact, in my first relationship, and this is something I actually don't talk much about, but is that it did start out abusive. I hate to say that long-term marriage of mine had abusive components. He actually hit me a couple times. And we got help right away. And he knew that I would divorce him if it didn't stop. But I didn't recognize that there was a financial abuse component that was happening either. And it didn't stop until we were like 2-3 years into the marriage. And it was around how we spent money. But to me, I just saw that as normal couple dynamics. I mean, he's bringing in income, I'm bringing income. We both feel edgy. We feel kind of protective of the money that we're making. To me, this is sort of like a normal struggle. I didn't see it as inappropriate, but I remember Tara, when he came home one day and he said he had seen a therapist and he was bitching to the therapist about how much money I spent. So the therapist paused him and said, "So is she spending a lot of money?" I mean, it could have been a legit argument. Maybe I was really pushing the budget. He goes, "No, she's not." And he said, "So then why are you fussing about this? Why is this a big deal?" And you know what? From that moment on, it changed. He stopped. He realized that it was coming out of himself and things got different. But for me, it was eye-opening. I hadn't realized that I was under this pressure, like a thumb of weight, of being, watched and feeling vigilant, like he's going to be angry if I maybe bought something extra for groceries or something.
Yeah, I have worked with plenty of couples where money is their biggest contentious point. And you're right that they don't necessarily see it as abuse. And a lot of couples a lot of popular advice too, talks about how money is something couples are going to have to negotiate and work through and compromise on. But we don't necessarily talk enough about when does it become abuse? When does it become someone being hyper vigilant, critical, nagging, constantly on your back, watching? And when does it become that abuse type? So what are other signs of financial abuse?
Well, can we pause for a second before we jump in there? Because I know how many times have you met couples who say, "Well, I'm staying home because one of us needs to watch the kids and we're saving money on childcare and it makes sense. And yeah, I got a degree, but I'm not using it and I don't have any experience in that, but he's taking good care of me and he promises to take good care of me." Or maybe, I'm not necessarily saying that it's just men doing this to women. It certainly could be the opposite, where women are doing it to men as well. But So there are times when it could be for legitimate reasons. The setups are that they are, and it looks like support. So when is it from turn from support to when it's actually abusive too? Because that's a hard line to identify.
Yeah. And I think you made a great point too about how it can start from this sort of nice place. I'm supporting for you, or maybe I'm going to help you get through school so you can achieve your dreams, or you can stay home and watch the kids, or stay home and take care of the home, which of course isn't gendered one way or another because it can happen in any relationship. But it starts from this place that seems good. There's the buy-in in the beginning of like, oh yeah, of course. But then time drags on
Right.
and people are not encouraged to get a job, or they find that they're getting an allowance and their allowance might get restricted, or there's that hypervigilance to what they're spending and how they're spending. And that person who originally bought into doing this now suddenly feels like, I don't have any control over the money that is coming in. It's not my money. It's my partner's money, right? It's not our money, and that's I think a very subtle shift that we may not even be aware is happening until suddenly it smacks us in the face of like, oh my gosh, my partner's not letting me go back to work, or I don't have enough money to buy the kids diapers, or stuff like that. I have to get permission. And there's a difference between asking out of courtesy, versus I have to get permission.
Yeah.
And I think that shift can just sort of just happen so slowly that we may not recognize it until we're in the middle of it.
That's a really good point. I found an article, Tara, that I thought was really, really helpful that lists signs of financial abuse. So let me read some of them. It was in Psych Central, written November 1st to 2022 by Hope Gillette, called What is Financial Abuse? She has a list of signs I thought was fascinating. It includes being pressured to give money, being kept from work or seeking employment, experiencing employment sabotage, not having access to personal or joint accounts. This is a big one. It shocked me. Being uninformed about passwords and login changes, not having input on expenditures, being berated for small spending, having to ask for money for basic needs, not being listed as the owner on legal paperwork, excessively covering a partner's expenditures or lifestyle, feeling unworthy or incapable of financial decisions, valuables or funds going missing, debt racking up, unauthorized loans or credit cards appearing in your name, being asked to share financial or identity information early in the relationship, and the financial information sharing is always one-sided. So did anything on that list surprise you?
I think what surprised me was the aspect of not of the login changes. So because certain things that can happen in a relationship, and it may have just slipped your partner's mind, So I guess when it would turn into abuse is it happens all the time and you're left out of the loop and you don't find out until you actually need to. But some of those signs could also be symptoms of financial infidelity. The being uninformed about major expenditures or big expenditures. That's definitely a sign of financial infidelity, which I don't think people talk about enough too. But financial infidelity is when your partner, they may have a credit card that you are unaware of, that they're spending or racking up money or debt on. They may have taken money out of a savings without informing you and are spending a large amount of money on things you're unaware of. This happened in my first marriage. My ex-husband had a credit card that I was aware of, but I didn't know he was spending money on it, let alone thousands of dollars on it for things for himself when we were at that time struggling because I'd taken 4 months off of work after my twins were born, and 10 weeks of those was unpaid. So we're struggling financially, and yet he's spending literally thousands of dollars on things for himself. So is financial infidelity also abusive, or, is there a line there? And what do we do about all those?
I hadn't even heard of the term financial infidelity until you just brought it up. So I'm like, whoa, You know, it's interesting because my first husband and I had a rule that when we were first got together and we started like calm down about money, that we were allowed to spend so much money before we had to talk to each other, that we actually had to reach out and say, hey, I'm going to about ready to spend this on this. Is this okay? You know, and even that, I can think of situations where that would be abusive,
Mhm.
where that you could feel like you're in fear and that you're going to have to justify a lot and you're scared of the criticism, or that you're going to hear that your reasons are never enough, they're never good enough. I could imagine those types of situations where it would be really, really stressful. But in our case, it worked. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's the other thing I guess I'm mindful about this, is that the line on this moves so easily from joint, supportive, collaborative efforts to controlling, withholding, dominating. I mean, they're right
Mhm.
smack. I mean, you can take the same behavior. Like I could say to people, you shouldn't have that rule. What? Well, we needed that rule. It was a really helpful rule for us. But in another family, I could see where it could be drastically warped into something terribly unhealthy.
Yes, and my relationship too, we are to discuss with each other before we make major purchases. And for us, it's a courtesy. And I think that's really the difference.
Mm.
How is your partner respond to when you make those kinds of requests or asks? How do they react? Is it this, criticizing, attacking, etc.? Or is it just like, oh, okay, yeah, I totally get it. So I think there is that being aware of the reaction piece that changes it. And you're right, every relationship has different rules, and there has to be buy-in on both sides from those rules. I think if one person is constantly attacking your discussions about money, they clearly don't have buy-in to that rule. And their plan is clearly the one-sided aspect. Like they're going to control it. They want to make those decisions, because I doubt those people are going and asking for permission. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. 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 And it's hitting me as I'm listening to both of us talk today, that we're talking about the way in which money gets used as another expression of care and generosity and love and compassion, or stinginess, exploitation, and manipulation. And it really boils back down to, where is the person at a heart level? And then they'll lose everything off of that as a way to express how they truly are able to invest in an intimate or not intimate way in this relationship.
and control. We need to mention that word every single time, because it really does come back to one person having control, dominance, power over another. And money is our livelihood, our ability to feel safe and secure.
Right. So I
It's a
already know
problem.
where people are going to go with this. They'll say, yep, yep, that's me. You identified me. I'm experiencing this right now. And plus, we just said 99%. So basically, everybody who's in an abusive relationship is experiencing financial abuse. So what are they supposed to do about it? I'm
So
sure you get hit with this. I get hit with this all the time. Well, like even like, well, I want to come to this event, or I really need to buy this resource, but I don't have any money. I don't have any access to money. Or I want to leave, but how do I leave when I can't make any money and I can't get access to our money?
Yeah. I I think the important aspect is start carving out something for yourself, even if it's opening a bank account for yourself that you can choose to put in part of your allowance or part of money in, or you have a little side job that your partner may or may not be aware of that you're funneling money into. And it sucks that we have to do that. But when we are dealing with trying to leave an abusive relationship or trying to stand up and be assertive in an abusive relationship, too often we really think the abuser is going to allow us or give us their buy-in, and we can't wait and depend on that. We have to take that for ourselves and start carving that out for us, even if it's just starting a bank account. You can literally start bank accounts online at your home, and your partner would have no awareness of you having set it up.
I know what my issue would have been, and I have a feeling this is going to be a huge proportion of people listening who's struggling with this issue. How do you know you're not stealing? That will feel like a form of lack of integrity, or even worse, theft.
Right, right. So if you are in a married relationship or a cohabitating relationship, it can be helpful to assess how your state views assets in terms of that. In my state, it's a joint. All of the assets are our assets. It didn't matter if he had a separate bank account or I had a separate bank account. It was all considered marital assets. So in that case, yes, it is marital assets. It's ours. It's joint, which means if I need to start funneling money to take care of myself and potentially need to leave this relationship, that's how I need to view it. It's not me stealing his money, because we're a married cohabitating couple with joint bills, etc., being able to funnel that. And unfortunately, a lot of abuse victims have to do that because there's no other option or outlet left for us. We aren't able to leave our homes to work necessarily. We aren't able to find income, find support, because we're caring for children, caring for, an elderly parent, whatever it might be. We're needing to find that aspect. And yeah, it can feel like we are a thief. It can.
Yeah, I think one way for me that would have helped me to think about this is I would have asked myself, and this goes for whoever's being abused, to ask myself, is my partner also spending money on themselves in a way that doesn't necessarily directly benefit me, but I know that this is maybe good for them? Maybe they really have this thing for a certain type of coffee, or maybe they really have a hobby and it costs a little bit of money that they really enjoy doing. And I have a feeling that if they assess the degree of the financial freedoms, they're not probably spending that kind of money back on themselves. Just sort of see this as that nest egg is their way, their coffee or their hobby, and that they're just putting the same sort of amounts of money, same kind of percentage of money away for themselves as this person's spending on themselves. So I think sometimes just changing our perspective is helpful. But I know that in a lot of these situations, if the partner finds out, they're very good at twisting it and making the victim feel ashamed and making the victim feel really bad. I know that, for example, I was accused of being too close to a friend or two, and that my ex likened it to his cheating. He compared them as if they're equivalent. Now, you and I can now today look at that and say that's laughable. They weren't anywhere near equivalent. And I'm sure those who are in this situation, that those who are being abusive are very good at being coercive. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't, just because they're being coercive doesn't make it accurate.
Right.
That's the hard part, is to keeping all that straight in our heads.
Which cognitive dissonance that we've talked about before in previous episodes is one of those things too, that how do we make sense of that? How do we make sense of our views, our values of ourselves? And I do think it's important to point out too that financial abuse can happen in family relationships. Children growing up, or young adults that still may be in some ways financially dependent on their parents. They may find the same thing. I like that aspect of it, where they might sabotage job or career options, because sabotage can look like showing up at your job and causing a fight. So your boss fires you because they don't want to deal with the drama, or making it difficult for you to go to work. I personally experienced financial abuse in my families. I wasn't allowed to have a car until I was over 18. And I lived in an area where there was no bus line. I would have had to take a walk. I would have had to walk at least 5 miles every day to get to anywhere where I might be able to work. So I was very limited on options for how to get money. Today, there are so many options online. So I think that really helps abuse survivors and victims seek out other opportunities. But it's not just romantic relationships. It could also be roommates, or if someone is our caregiver, or families. It's a lot of different relationships, and we need to see that abuse can happen in any of those relationships. And when it happens in families, I think it's particularly damaging, because we have this belief that our families are supposed to support us and encourage us and love us, and they know what's at our best interest. They know what's at our best interest at heart. Yeah. And when that proves to then be abusive, we're really pushing back against some long negative narratives that have negatively impacted us.
Oh yeah, and having consequences for our life path. I mean, talking about careers and equal opportunities and exposure to things. Absolutely. Yeah, it could be simply to say, I'll pay for these things, but I won't pay for those things. And then forcing people into certain directions they may not want to. And it's hard when we're talking about minors. Well, minors don't already have access to a lot of things, so they depend on that. They're very vulnerable. So you're absolutely right. unfortunately, here's the hard advice that if you're an adult and you're not a minor, the burden of getting out of this situation falls on that individual.
Mhm.
Don't you agree? I mean, I hear so many times a week people requesting help, but what can I do to change their access to an account or to change their employment situation? I mean, it really comes down, this is the part that kills me. I wish I had a magic wand. It really comes down to each of us having to take a very honest appraisal of our situation and looking at what we can do to make small but incremental changes. And I view it, I love that from the movie What About Bob, where he talked about baby steps.
Baby steps?
I view it literally like, what baby step could you take that would get you to one step closer to having a little bit more money so that you might be free at some point down the road, and viewing it like running a marathon, like literally from a couch to a marathon.
It means setting small, reasonable goals for yourself, one day at a time. One tiny step at a time.
Baby steps.
For instance, when you leave this office, don't think about everything you have to do in order to get out of the building. Just think of what you must do to get out of this room. And when you get to the hall, deal with that hall, and so forth. You see?
Baby steps.
Mhm. And I think a good baby step for anyone is to just open the account.
Mm.
I don't know how you feel about that, but we can do it online at home. You have the ability to clear your search history. You have the ability to do that, but just opening an account and knowing that it's there, that I have a place to put money is an important, valuable step. Or if that doesn't feel like an option for you, keeping money somewhere, finding a way to keep it where, I always, with abuse survivors, and I did this myself, having a go bag that you hid outside your home. And I literally had this. I had a backpack that had items that I could literally run away with in the event that I needed to leave. That was hidden outside my home in a bush. And that's not an option for a lot of us, depending on where we live, how much our abuser may watch us, that kind of thing. But having a go bag is a valuable thing for us to do, because we have to acknowledge that relationship doesn't have our best interests at heart. An abusive relationship can't. And we need to make some real active steps towards taking that power back for ourselves.
I love that. That's a great idea. A really great idea. I've actually put together a list of, and another listener of mine helped me do the list, but I have a list of documents and records and licenses and things that you should know where they're at, have copies handy. So that's something that I have listed in my resources too. So things that you may not necessarily think about. We often think maybe we might realize we need to know where our passport is, but you also need your marriage certificate and the kids' birth certificates and things like immunization records. And so if anybody's interested in that, please check out my resource list on that. So that's another option. But I agree, a go bag is so important. Here's one of the hard things, a big mental shift I had to make, Tara, in my healing process from getting out of this vulnerability to abuse. I always saw myself as part of a team, part of, I don't know another better word, part of a group, that it wasn't just Kerry on her own. It wasn't just Kerry as an individual. It was Kerry is part of this family, or Kerry is a part of this relationship. And for me to start to heal, I had to realize that it's both. It's not one or the other. It's a both and thing, that I'm always need to make sure that Kerry herself is cared for, as she also cares for the context that she's in, whether it's a family context or a relationship context, that it's both, and not to neglect of one over the other. I think when you get way out of, and I'm not even talking about you're not allowed to think of yourself first. I'm just saying when it gets way out of balance, like for me, when I was in those relationship or in a family, everything that occurred was for the good of that relationship or the good of that family. And I was far back, way far back. The problem was then when those situations are dysfunctional, then that meant I wasn't getting cared for at all. And that's been part of my healing. And I hear that a lot when I listen to people. I hear they're so preoccupied with the relationship dynamics or the family dynamics that they miss that they need to be, that back to that analogy of airplane. If you're dying of oxygen deprivation, you're not going to be able to save your child next to you. You have to start with yourself first, and then you can save everyone around you who's important to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. This is a tough topic. It's a heartbreaking one. It's one that I know for me, when I hear it, it creates a lot of helplessness. I hate hearing it. And I know people feel really trapped, but it comes back to, like you said, I love your advice. I think that's a great piece of, it's just open an account. And you're right. It is easy. You can do it in 5 minutes.
Right.
They're all over the place on the internet, and it's so simple. And then begin to think about how to funnel money into that. That's a great suggestion.
And also, if someone else is, if one of our listeners is struggling just in the idea of leaving the relationship, really assessing battered women shelters or domestic violence shelters in your area. Those places are geared towards allowing people to leave and show up with just the clothes on your back. And they'll pay for you to have a taxi to go there. They'll able to provide clothes and food and shelter, and even spending some time just looking up those places. So if you do need to go, and you don't necessarily have the funds now, knowing that those are available to you, having those resources, because they're in most major cities, being able to find that for yourself.
Yeah. I used to work for a runaway shelter, and we were connected into the United Way system. The United Way still have a directory of resources? They used to be able to call them, and they'd have all the local resources, like food banks and shelters. And do you happen to know that? I don't know that, but
I don't know that myself. I will say I worked for a battered women shelter for many years, and they do have a lot of those resources, like legal advice, legal clinics, food banks. They have a lot of those resources too, so that could be a place to start too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was a part of a runaway shelter for a while too. So So sometimes just starting one of those, even if it's not exactly what you're struggling with, they can often point you into the next direction and lead you, so great. Well, this was fascinating, and I would love to know what people think. Maybe did we miss a point? Maybe there's something we didn't talk about that we should dive in deeper. So if you feel like that we didn't quite give enough of a focus on something, let us know and get back to us about this. Today's self-help tip is lead with your head, not with your heart. When I get into a relationship with somebody, I find that once I start to hear who they are and their experiences and everything, I begin to be very sympathetic, even empathetic, and I make allowances and excuses for their bad behavior. Whereas if I was to view it from an outsider's perspective, I might see it quite differently. So I'm urging people that when you are in a relationship and things start going wrong, like maybe there's a lie or something goes missing, or maybe they've laid hands on you, to consider this from your head, not necessarily through the grid of your supportive, loving heart. What do you think, Tara? Have you seen that as a problem too?
Absolutely. I think love can make us really deny the realities of what's happening, because we see it as based on or a result of someone's past. You know what I mean? So we see, oh, they had a bad childhood. That's why they do X, Y, and Z. But we have to divorce it from that, because a lot of us have bad childhoods and don't end up being abusive or doing unkind, disrespectful things to people. And if we are leading with that empathy piece, we are going to continue to accept and tolerate abusive, unacceptable behavior. When I was being financially abused, I wasn't aware it was happening. Did you find this episode eye-opening too? Let us know, and make sure to try leading with your head and not your heart. If you haven't yet, make sure to follow or subscribe, write us a review, and if you know someone who would benefit from this episode, please share it with them. If you're not following us on social media yet, you can check me out at tara.relationshipcoach and Kerry at Kerry McAvoy, PhD. We will see you back here next Monday, where we'll be talking about how to do no contact or limited contact with your ex.